Jacob fled from his brother Esau and traveled to his uncle Laban's household in Haran. Tired and uncertain, he only carried the blessing of God's promise. At a well he met Rachel, a young shepherdess, and his heart was captured by her beauty and kindness. Jacob offered to serve 7 years for her hand in marriage, and those years felt like only days because of his love for her. But on the wedding night, Laban deceived Jacob and gave him Leah instead. Jacob felt betrayed, but Laban insisted Rachel could only be his if he worked another 7 years. Jacob agreed, and soon he had 2 wives, Leah, whom he had not chosen, and Rachel, whom he dearly loved. Though Rachel was barren, God saw Leah's pain. He opened her womb, and she bore sons, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Each birth carried Leah's desperate hope that Jacob would finally love her. Meanwhile, Rachel wept bitterly for children. In her desperation, she gave her maid Bilhah to Jacob, and Leah followed with her maid, Zilpah. The family grew with more sons, yet rivalry filled the household. At last, God remembered Rachel. She gave birth to a son and said, "God has taken away my shame." She called him Joseph, which means, "May the Lord add another son." Little did she know this child's name was prophetic. Joseph would be used by God to add life and salvation to entire nations. When Joseph was born, Jacob's heart turned toward home. He asked Laban to release him, but Laban, a man who worshipped idols, begged Jacob to stay. He had learned that the Lord's blessing rested on him only because Jacob was there. Even an unbeliever could see the hand of God. Jacob remained for a time, and God multiplied his flocks until he became exceedingly prosperous. But eventually, envy and suspicion grew in Laban's heart, and God commanded Jacob to return to Canaan. Jacob gathered his wives and children and set out quietly. When Laban pursued him in anger, God intervened in a dream, warning Laban not to harm Jacob. They met, argued, and finally made a covenant of peace, and Jacob pressed onward, guided by the promise of God. Later, Rachel conceived again. As she labored, her life slipped away. With her last breath, she named the child Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow. But Jacob called him Benjamin, son of my right hand. Rachel died and was buried on the road to Bethlehem. Genesis 35:18 says, "As her soul was departing, for she died, she called his name Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin." Joseph grew under his father's love, a symbol of Rachel's long-awaited joy. But his brothers envied him deeply, and hatred poisoned their hearts. This division would lead to betrayal. Yet through Joseph, God would one day save not only his family, but also nations from famine. What others meant for evil, God would use for good. And from Leah's son Judah, the lineage of the Messiah would one day be established. Through this complicated, broken family, God was writing the greatest story of redemption. Friend, what can we learn? God can bring blessing out of brokenness. He sees the unloved and the forgotten. He hears the cry of the desperate. He prospers his people even in unjust situations. And most importantly, he weaves all things together for his plan of salvation. This story points us to Jesus. Like Joseph, he was rejected by his own but became the Saviour of the world. Through him, sorrow is turned to joy, and death to everlasting life. John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life."